Thank you to the Museum of Science for inviting me today. I've been here, this is the second time, so good to be back. Thank you all for coming, especially on a wintry Monday night. Very kind of you. As Amy said, all proceeds go to the museum, so you're making a big difference. So thank you for doing that. So Story Cube, there's been a little synopsis, and you would have seen a bit of description on the event. Story Cube is my formula that I've created with a business partner of mine. It's a formula to help entrepreneurs to inspire, pitch and sell with ease. So I'm going to take you through that today's session. It's normally a 3-hour session, so it's going to be whistle-stop tour. We're going to talk for about an hour, and then there'll be questions at the end for about half an hour. So, but if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to jump in, and there'll be a couple of opportunities to do that as well. So Story Cube was born out of a bit of a frustration when working with customers. They didn't really get the basics right, the basics in branding. So the idea of this formula is to get the basics right, so then you can build a stronger brand in the long run. Okay. That one slide. So as I said, my name is Michael. And I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a moment. These are just some of the companies that I've worked with. But before I do that, I'd like to get a sense of who's in the room so I can judge what I talk about most. So raise your hands if you're an entrepreneur or a business owner. A few, not very many. Okay. If you're an employee for someone else, so a lot of you, that's good. If you're particularly a creative, a designer, marketer, salesperson, about half, I'd say. And any students in the room? A lot of students in the room. Okay. All right, so normally this talk is delivered towards the startup idea or entrepreneurs, but it works just as well for creators or people supporting those types of brands and organizations. So sometimes some of the questions will be directed towards thinking of yourself as a brand or a company owner, but you can adapt that to put it onto the brands that you potentially want to work with or that you're working with at the moment. So a little bit about me. Story Cube has been built on 30 years combined experience with my co-founder, a guy called Robbie Dale, who's also a brand strategist. So we've had about 15 years in the industry each. We've worked with hundreds of companies around the world, big and small, in lots of different sectors. So we're bringing all that experience together. Here's just a few of the businesses that we've worked with. And as I said, we became quite frustrated that clients would trip up on the basics. So we wanted to create a formula that we saw again and again when working with these customers and these clients that they could use as the basis to tell their story, to create their strategy, and to take their brand to the next level so they can then go on to bigger things. Personally, I've run my agency called The House. It's a branding marketing agency for the last 10 years. That's taught me a lot as an entrepreneur, as a creative, as a business owner. Been lucky enough to win awards with the Design Council, worked on lots of different accelerator programs, so a lot of this information you see today has come out of all of that, working with different startups, helping them pitch, helping them get investment, helping them get customers as well. And I've been on the other side of the coin. I've actually been on accelerators and I've drawn information from that experience as well to show you today. So hopefully, by sharing my experience, I'll be able to help you either do that for other customers and clients in the future, or do that for your own businesses as well. So a couple of outcomes. You've got one sheet of paper and you've got two sides. So on one side is the Story Cube itself. If you go through this today or later on, either for your company or on behalf of another, this is the Story Cube, and this is something to fill in as you go through. Don't be afraid to start detailing ideas. And then on the other side is the action plan. So the idea is that hopefully some of this thinking will bring up some ideas, maybe some questions, maybe some actions that you want to implement over the coming days or coming weeks. So on the back, put those down, and then right at the bottom, list your top 3 things that you will actually implement, so that you can come away from this session with tangible outcomes. As I say, normally it's a 3-hour session, so this is a whistle-stop tour, just a taster to get you going with your thinking. I like the sessions to be quite interactive, so just for a couple of minutes, I want you to think about and discuss with someone next to you what your favourite brand is and why. That could be any brand whatsoever. Think of fashion, technology, travel, banking, supermarkets, cinemas, entertainment, theme parks, whatever it may be. The most important question, part of that question, is why. Why is that brand important to you? Why do you like it? Maybe why do you love it? Why would you recommend it to a friend? So have a think about that, discuss that in pairs for a couple of minutes, and then we'll share a couple and move on to the next part. Off you go, 2 minutes.
Yeah, because I always like the inspiring the teachers they make me think about themselves. Like I find it quite it's not empty, it's there's not something behind it. So it's like
Just
celebrate special product, it's like but I don't do that. But I found that very successful I mean, I think the branding is quite minimalistic. Everything's like visionary.
Right, just come together for a moment. Sorry about that. I know it's not very long. There's probably a lot to say, especially if you're from a creative background. So we've got time to share just a couple. So from this side of the room, who would like to share favourite brand and why? Anyone brave? There we go.
Lux shoes. Lux shoes. Men's shoes. Lux. L-O-A-K-E-S.
Oh, I don't know. That's the first I've not known the brand. Tell us about it.
Well, they're heritage men's footwear brand, okay. I think 19th century. But the reason I like them is the workmanship, the craftsmanship, the longevity. So you can buy them. I've got say my colleague there. I've got a pair 5 years old they are.
Yeah.
I've replaced the soles once, and it's still the best pair of shoes I've ever had. Never moved.
Wonderful.
That heritage is why.
So taking that craftsmanship, quality, value for money probably because of 5 years.
Yeah.
So all these things are really important to brands. Any product, any service that you're buying. So that's a really good example. Thank you. One more from this side. Who would like to go? Favourite brand and why?
We like Dove just because we thought the products were good, but also the way they market themselves, quite inclusive, quite diverse.
So that was Dove.
Yeah.
Dove. So yeah, they're very different in the way in the market, and they're trying to create a community around them.
Yeah.
Obviously been around for many years, and have to think tactically and strategically about what they do. So again, it's a really good example, creating a community, creating that following around a bigger picture, a bigger vision. So it's a nice example. Thank you. Okay, well we're going to look at how the reason behind why people like brands influences a good story and a good strategy. So I'll go on to looking at the story in itself. So I believe that the story is the foundation, right at the bottom of that triangle. And above that, you then lead on to design and marketing and ultimately sales. And obviously those areas are services in their own rights. But with the story, you have the strategy, and that's the foundation. And quite often working with clients over the last 10, 15 years, I found that often the story or the strategy was missing, and they wanted to dive into everything else. And it would be okay, and you could still have a good outcome. But without the story and the strong foundations, it was difficult to be a really great company, making a really great product and service. Below that is hard work. Oh, I went too far. Below that is hard work and good luck. So if you get back to where we were. I believe in that because also I've worked with lots of entrepreneurs and lots of startup businesses or scale-up businesses that after a few years they really want to take off. But it's the entrepreneurs that work the hardest who seem to get the best luck. I've seen that personally from stories of founders who will have 100 phone calls a week with prospects and new customers and potential customers and current customers, and they'll just keep talking to them until they find out what will make their product or service better. But there's a lot of entrepreneurs that won't do that because they're shy, because they haven't got time, they haven't got resources, and so the hard work isn't there, and so they don't find the right success. There's other big examples. 3 Helsinki students in 2003 spent 6 years making 51 computer games. And they didn't really do very well. You could say they failed. But the 52nd game became Angry Birds. So there's a lot of effort that goes into it. And there's lots of different stories online from most successful entrepreneurs who have failed a lot to get where they are today. So hard work and good luck is key. But you're here on a Monday night, so you understand that already. Looking at StoryCube, believe it's at the heart of all businesses. And the benefits are threefold on one side. So a lot of you are creators, which is great. A good story, a good strategy is like a really good brief to creators. It enables collaboration and it makes it easier for everyone to go in the right direction. Perhaps for equipping the sales team, it's important as well. Even if that sales team is just one person, maybe the founder at the time. But it's a really good way to have a solid foundation, a solid story, so if you do have to make that customer call or have a pitch or create that marketing campaign, there's a story there to hold it all together. And then, as I said, I've worked on lots of accelerator programs, so pitching in the startup world is a must, and most startups who, particularly from the tech world, who want to scale, need investment to get going, and having a really good story at the heart of that pitch enables people to connect emotionally. On the other side, there's motivating yourself and your team. So sometimes it's looking at that story and thinking, okay, I'm in a year or two into business, things aren't quite going to plan, but maybe the core story will keep you focused. Attracting the right talent. Not all businesses can pay the salaries they want to pay at the market rates, but a good story can attract people to maybe take the hit slightly on the salary or other benefits that they'd find at big corporates and give it a go for a smaller organisation. And anyone who is a founder or entrepreneur or maybe knows one knows that there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of late nights, sometimes working on holiday and weekends, and convincing your family that it's worth it and in the long run it's going to be worth it is another challenge as well. So looking at StoryCube itself, as I say, you've got the sheets in front of you and you can see all the questions. But this is really essentially split into 6 key questions. And it balances business and it balances brand in our mind. And it's what we feel is a good pitch, a good story, a good strategy. The top level, motivation, problems and solutions, are focused on the business side of things. These are things that organisations tend to know, or they can at least build on. In the early days, they might not have the bottom sections. The connections, how they reach their customers, the differentiators, how they stand out, but also they may have not solved the obstacles that might come ahead. So that's the brand elements, and that's how we see the balance between the two. For all of this, we have to keep in mind the audience as well. So for every good story, there may be multiple audiences. And even for one company, they might have 4 or 5 different personas to think about. So if you are a brand owner or working on behalf of someone and taking control of that, or you're helping another brand develop as well, think about developing different ways of telling that story. Slightly adapt each one to the audience needs. Because it's important that you connect with them on that level as well. So StoryCube is our own concept, but you might recognise some of the thinking because we've based it on our experience and what we've learned over the years, online, university, working with clients, but we've also put our own twist on it. We've picked a cube on purpose to limit down the story to 6 key elements and to make it tangible. So if later on you fill this in and you want to cut it out and create that cube, it can sit physically on your desk and it can be there as a reminder of the elevator pitch, the story, the strategy behind it, which you don't often get in business. It feels more intangible. And we've had in the past people who have completed our course that they feel that they can hold it in their mind. Because there's only 6 questions. You tend to only need to use 3 or 4 of the answers when talking to people, so you don't have to remember too much, and that's part of the challenge. If you only take away one thing tonight, this is the key question. Is your story cube? So a great story should be concise, so it's easy to understand and listen to. It should be unique, so it offers something people haven't heard 100 times over. It should be believable, this is really important, so it's realistic and it's backed up with evidence. A lot of the time people will say things and brands will promise things, but they don't really back it up. It's just more of the same and probably what the competitors are saying. And lastly, is it engaging? Will your audience want to know more? And sometimes that's about how you tell that story as well. A couple other things to keep in mind is the aim of a great story is to connect. There's 3 things to remember with your customer or on behalf of your client's customer. First, it's the head, the logical needs of their audience. They're going to try and justify this purchase or donation, they want that connection. Hand, the practical needs of the audience, and then most importantly, the heart, the emotional needs. And that's where the story really comes in. So there's logical and practical reasons for buying things, for supporting, for being a partner, but the emotional connections can trump all of that and jump over any maybe obstacles that are lying in the way. So another exercise, just to get the creative juices flowing. Firstly, hopefully you're not sitting next to someone you know, but if you are, pretend you don't for a moment. Introduce yourself to the person next to you, just for 30 seconds. Tell them a little bit about yourself, what you do, and perhaps your organisation. So 30 minutes each, and then swap. Off you go.
We have a company. We rank. There's my favorite. What's ranking? Somehow sales, but mostly the main topic is ranking. So I want to work there.
Swap over if you haven't. 30 more seconds. Okay, just going to pause there for a moment. Again, this is just to get you thinking, just to get the ideas flowing. So I'd like to try something slightly different now. I want you to reflect back to your partner what you heard. What was sticky? What was most interesting? What was most memorable? And just for this exercise, what's the one piece of advice you can give them to improve how they give their elevator pitch next time? Or introduce themselves next time? So 30 seconds, off you Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So hopefully that was helpful. I know it's very quick, but something to do again and again. Informal circumstances, practice at networking events, maybe via email or phone, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're a founder or part of the sales team. So a few key takeaways are be ready, so have that story ready, and hopefully at the end of this session you have elements of that, or you can help your customers do that. You never know when the occasion is going to arise. It could be, for an entrepreneur, it could be at parties, could be at weddings, could be on a train. Sometimes opportunities come out of nowhere. Have multiple versions of this story. So when I work with customers, we'll start with this as a foundation, and this is the full story. But often all they need is a one-liner. They need a tagline, or they need a 1-minute pitch for an event, or they need an animation script, or a sales call script that they can use and share out with their team. So the idea behind the story cube is that that's the starting point, and then you can adapt it for various situations. And like you're doing now, practice makes perfect. It's always adapting, always listening to the other person, understanding their needs, their requirements, and then knowing what to say back to them, particularly in networking scenarios. So this is a little exercise I normally ask the founders, or the entrepreneurs, or people in the business, just to rate the strength of their brand story. But if you are working with customers as well, it's a really good exercise at the start of the briefing process, just to help understand where they feel they are. It's not a test, it's a self-assessment. It's just an understanding of how you feel about how much confidence there is in the brand story, or whatever it is you're testing. So if you are a brand owner or in that position where you can have some control over that, pick a number from 0 to 10, so 0 being terrible, 10 being awesome, and hopefully by the end of the session you'll feel a bit more confident, and particularly if you go over this again in a week or so, you can start to look at how you can improve that story. So any questions so far? Okay, good. We're going to go on to the actual story cube now. So we're going to focus on this sheet. As I say, there is the action sheet on the back, so feel free to write in notes and anything you need to do next. But these are the key questions. So I'll just run through them very quickly, and then we'll go through each one in detail. We're going to pair these up as well. So motivations, this is normally where we start. If you're a founder, the company's probably started from a personal motivation. But if you're working with a customer, it's to draw out that information. Why does the organisation exist, and what keeps that organisation focused, especially when things go wrong or not quite to plan. Pairing that up with obstacles is really important, because sometimes motivations can solve the obstacles, or at least give you a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. So what might stop success, and how do you plan to overcome this? This isn't something we'll shout about, but it's something to be aware of, and particularly for anyone who's investing in the company or partnering with the organisation. They're going to want to know that there's at least a plan or an awareness of these things. The next two are problems and solutions. So what is the customer problem you solve, and how have you validated this? That's really key. And then solution is one of the simplest. What exactly do you do, and how do you deliver on that promise? So sometimes the how is more important here. It's about the processes and the systems in place, and it starts to lead towards differentiators. That can sometimes be a differentiator. And then the last two, differentiators and connections. So what are your wow factors, and how do you clearly stand out? This is probably the core of most brand storytelling, and what most people would go to first, but without the rest, it doesn't really hold up. And then lastly, what are the connections? So this is the marketing and sales side of things. How do you reach and build a relationship with your audience?
And how do you do that most effectively as well? Because resources are always tighter than you want them to be. So we'll dive in briefly onto each side. First one is, why does your organisation exist, and what keeps you focused? So if you do have an organisation, or you've got one in mind that you're working with, you can start filling this in as I'm talking. Key things to think about. This is kind of like your vision. Vision for the business, the values and the belief systems behind the organisation. What were the triggers to start the organisation in the first place? What keeps the organisation on the right track, especially when things don't quite go to plan? Maybe it's too early days for that, but if we think about the obstacles, what might go wrong and what might need to be overcome. This is kind of like a compass for the organisation. And if it's told correctly, this could be a really key part of the story. Rather than saying what you do and how you do it, this is why you do it. And that can be really important to connect with the audience, and then that allows you to tell the rest of the story. So if you want to go through this, there's the red, yellow, green traffic lights, again, for each part of the story. Just one moment. Each part of the story, you can give yourself a quick rating on that as well. Yes, question?
Would you be so literal and say to the person in front of you, why does your organisation exist?
If it's appropriate, yeah. I mean, there are particularly circumstances like social enterprises and charities, for sure. If you've had a conversation with maybe the individual, and you can see that they're actually wanting to know a little bit more about why, because they've got a good understanding of what you do, the why will connect better, then yes, you could start that. Sometimes, even if it is, hey, what do you do, like at a networking event, you can say, well, let me tell you why I do it first. This is my story. This is my very brief background. Obviously, try and do that in 10 seconds and not a long story, and draw them into that. Good question. I'm going to show you one example from the real world, and this is going to be Airbnb. Normally in the workshop we show a few, and online there's quite a few more examples as well, so you can dig deeper later on if you want. But in terms of Airbnb, the reason why they're chosen is because everyone knows them. They're obviously very successful now, but they were very tiny, and the founders literally created the company to make rent. Their rent increased, and they had to pay the bills, so they started renting out spare space in their home, literally airbeds. So it started off as a startup, and with very limited resources and a bright idea, just like many companies do. So in terms of the motivation, they say on their website, and have done for a very long time, we imagine a world where we can belong anywhere. And that's a much bigger picture, and much more impactful than just being another hotel chain or just having rooms. They could have been quite practical and quite straightforward about it, but they've opened up motivation and made it something they can build on as they go through the organisation. In the last 10, 12 years, they've adapted and grown a lot, which we'll look at in a moment. So another trick, if you're not sure about motivations, or maybe a client doesn't know, is simply to ask why. It's very simple. Just keep asking why. This is partly taken from Toyota's 5 whys, which in their production line, if they wanted to find out where there's a problem, you just keep asking why until the solution makes itself clear. This is often the case where you only need to ask 3 times. And this is an example from one of our workshops. There was a lady in the attendees, in the group. She was half Chinese and half English, and that will become apparent in a moment why I've shared that. She was starting a food business, and this is what she was saying. So she wanted to share delicious food. And we said, okay, interesting, why? So people can enjoy authentic Chinese cooking. Okay, but there's a lot of Chinese food. Okay, why? I want people to understand another side of Chinese food. Okay, maybe her background is influencing that. Why? It brings to life a rich culture many don't know. Okay, well there's starting to be the elements of a problem, there's a motivation, and there's a story evolving. So just as a very quick example, this could be illustrated as the brand is therefore driven by a desire to uncover hidden Chinese culture. It happens to be done through food. So it could be lots of different things in the future. The business now has a lot of different possibilities. Her background is to use Chinese cooking, but also Western influence, and mix the two. But that can open up to many different things. So it opened up her eyes as a business owner to what could be and how to share that with other people. So next we'll look at obstacles. As I say, if you know your motivations, the obstacles are sometimes a little bit easier to overcome. So obstacles, what might stop success? And how might you overcome this? This, as I say, you don't shout about, but it's a good way to stress test, to find out where the problems might exist in the future, and it's a good way to plan improvements in the future. It's particularly useful for investors, as they're often investing in the team, and they want to know that there's at least an awareness of what the obstacles might be, and how that will be solved in the future. Even for big companies like Airbnb, they've still got challenges, they've still got problems to deal with, maybe even more so as they grow. So you can look at hotel chains, and B&Bs are always going to be competitors there, and companies like Booking.com and Hotels.com are even becoming copycats, so they have to be aware of that. Tech companies, tech giants like Google and Amazon and Facebook haven't muscled in yet, but could quite easily. They've got the communities, they've got the technology, so let's see what happens in the future. And regulation changes are happening all the time. So some cities ban Airbnb, so they've got to be aware of all this, and I'm sure they've got plans in place. But some of the things they can do to overcome this is continue to improve their customer service, continue to provide comprehensive insurance, so they de-risk the whole process, and to diversify. So they want to create a world where everyone belongs. It's not just through rooms, it's through local guides, it's through restaurant partnerships they have, it's through the tours that they put on, and many other things that they're going to do in the future, including things like cookery classes and art classes and things like that. So when you go to another country and go to one of their rooms and stay the night, you can also experience life as a local as well. Here's a list that I want to share of potential obstacles for organisations, particularly if you're working with organisations from a brand point of view, but also a business strategy point of view. This is a relevant conversation to have. And if you're a founder or working in an organisation, these are things to be aware of, because often they're not discussed. So just take a moment to see which ones are relevant to you as an organisation or to the brand you're working with. Pick up to three, not too many, the ones that are most relevant to you, that resonate the most, and ones you can overcome. So as an example, for StoryCube, over the last few years we've been developing it, but I didn't have a co-founder a few years ago. I knew that would be a problem, and I now can see that the outcome is 10 times better than what I would have produced on my own. It may even have petered out and not exist if I didn't have a co-founder. Lack of validation over the years, and managed to get maybe weekly or monthly at least chances to speak in public and share the idea and put it into a course and try it out in lots of different formats to see what works and what doesn't. A lot hasn't worked, and some things have worked really well, and we're focused on that. And then the lack of IP as well. When I started giving talks like this, say 5 or 6 years ago, it was based a lot on other people's content. I was showing what other people were doing. So when my co-founder came on board, we worked hard to make sure that we had something that was ours, something that we owned with our own name, our website, our own style, our own way of doing things to improve on it. So all these things were obstacles, but they've actually been turned around into things that can improve the brand, and it can be part of that story as well. And a lot of people like to hear that sort of coming from a difficult place to somewhere better. That can be really powerful. Thinking positively, here are a whole list of outcomes that you can, so objectives that you can overcome, and this is how you overcome them. Again, look at the list, think about which ones resonate most with you, which ones could solve some of the problems for the brand you're working with or your own brand. Every brand will have some difficulties, and there'll be a lot of obstacles you're not quite sure how to fix yet. So these can be looked at as a way to try and overcome them. So looking at the story cube, we've got motivations and obstacles, and as I say, they connect together. If you have a brand now, or if you have a brand that you're working with, let's just take a minute or two for you to discuss that in pairs or write down a few words just to fill in the gaps of what the motivations are and what potential obstacles might stop you. And importantly for the obstacles, how will you overcome them? So take a minute or two and then we'll move on to the next part. Off you go.
Yeah. So how do I? Because we are B2B. Not so easy to formulate. Yeah, we are like one of the largest fishing companies.
So why?
I think the challenging is going to be the market environment is challenging. And it's quite a complex business.
Okay, we're going to move on to the problem side of the cube now. We'll just come together for a moment. Sorry to bore you again. Thank you very much. Okay, so what is the top customer problem? By that I mean the must-solve problem. Sometimes it's called the tier 1 problem that you can solve. And how have you validated this? As I say, this is a must-solve problem for the customer. There's so many companies that try to solve an okay problem that a lot of other companies are doing, or even customers are solving for themselves. It doesn't create a sustainable, growing business. It creates an okay business. And that's sometimes part of the challenge. If you work with brands, sometimes it's good to go back to the business side of things as much as trying to fix their brand and communications. The important thing is this is all about research and validation. And there's so many businesses that don't put enough effort into the research side of things. They don't talk to their customers. They don't really test out their product or service. And they definitely don't listen to what their customers are saying. Some of them do, but they might do it at the very start of the process and then forget about it because they feel they've got all the answers. But 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, a few years on, their business is just ticking over because they haven't continued to talk to their customers. So it's really key. If that's not happening for yourself or for clients you're working with, then make sure that that's part of their remit. For Airbnb, the customer problem they were solving, it's hard to discover inexpensive, interesting places to stay. That's for the general public. Is anyone an Airbnb customer? Quite a few of you, yeah, most of you. I've used it many times. Has anyone been a host? A couple of people. So I've done that as well and had surprisingly good experiences. I was very worried about it and risk averse, but it went very well. So for homeowners, they can't easily monetize their space, or they couldn't 10, 12 years ago. Now it's relatively easy to do through Airbnb, but through many other copycats. They're dealing with two sides of the marketplace and trying to solve the problem for both sides at the same time, which is tough to do. Quick note about going niche. This is a bell curve to look at your core tribe. So it's important to find your niche in terms of your audience. Who would really, really enjoy your product and service? Who would shout about it? Who would be your champion? Who would be your biggest advocate? Normally, it's the innovators and the early adopters. You can see the innovators down here, 2.5%. It's not many people. But if you had a normal product and you talk to the right sort of audience, at least, and you talk to 100 people, probably 2 or 3 will give it a go. As long as it's at the right sort of price and it's a fair product, they'll give it a try because they're willing to take the risk. If it's a good product, then you may get 15% automatically. Now that's the returns you'd expect from sales and marketing, but the chasm is really tricky to jump across. And there's a book called Crossing the Chasm which goes into a lot more detail than this, but it gets it into the early majority.
And this is when the business is really taking off. But it's about finding that core demographic, that core audience that really believes in the product and service, and also refining that product and service to that audience so that you can grow with them as the other way. So a couple of examples, big examples. Facebook focused on university students and grew outwards very quickly, but they grew from there. Amazon started with books only, tested it with that market, tested it with that product, and then grew out from there. And Apple, obviously, been going for 40 years, but for a very long time, for a good 10 years, they were focused on creatives in a certain industry and techies. And now, everyone has the ability or want for an Apple product of various formats. Obviously, their product range has opened up, but also their audience has. That takes time. That takes a lot of money going into the brand, a lot of investment going into the products, but it gets them through that curve, over the chasm, and then into the other side. So it's something to keep in mind, especially for startups, to focus on the core demographics. In terms of research, there's two main types. There's primary research and secondary research, which you've probably seen before. But again, a lot of people don't do it, or a lot of people do it very quickly and then forget about it and move on and try and guess all the way along. So it's good to start with a hypothesis based on experience. There's nothing wrong with that. Often people are trying to solve their own problem or a problem they're at least aware of and maybe come into contact with or have some relevance. But we need to validate that. So for example, primary research can be really good. Just online surveys sent out via Facebook and Twitter and online, or going out to specific groups and paying for people to take part in these if you want a wider group. But then using focus groups and doing this multiple times. I've heard of companies that have done that 250 times before launching because they really wanted to understand the problem they were solving and refine their solution to that problem. And one-to-one interviews. So all these are good ways of doing it, and you can funnel down to really understand what's going on. But it's also great to back it up with secondary research. The only issue with secondary research is everyone else has the same access. And so it's down to the analysis and down to pairing it up with primary research to make sure that it's valid, it's true, and it's true to you, and gives you the competitive advantage over your other companies that you're competing against, because you all know a little bit more information than they do. So that goes hand in hand with the solution. This is hopefully the easier part of things. It's normally the answer to the question, what do you do, either individually or as an organisation. A couple of things to think about, or different ways of thinking about it, are how do you explain what you do to a grandparent or a child? So basically simplify it a little bit. For people who are not in your sector, that don't know the jargon perhaps, if you can't simplify it, you probably don't know it well enough as either creative helping the company or the company themselves. And can you explain it clearly at a noisy bar or a windy bus stop? So as simply as possible. That one sentence that intrigues someone that they want to know a little bit more. It's almost bordering on to the differentiator, but it's about the what and the how. Here's a quick example for Airbnb again. Obviously it's accommodation and global travel experiences, so it's expanding. But how do they do it? Well, it's provided by a community of distributed hosts via the online marketplace. Without iPhone coming out in 2007, Airbnb would have had a really tough time. But they utilised that. And as designers in the founding team, they focused heavily on the UI and the UX, so user interface design and the user experience, and they improved on that. So there are certain advantages that they've jumped on, like technology, but that was open to everyone. They just were aware of it and they took advantage of it. When you do have a solution, try and test it. So even if you've got an organisation already and it's been established for years, it's really important, if you're going to launch a new product or service or package or slight innovation, and you want to test it out before putting in lots of resources, then this is the type of thing we suggest. I would say it's a minimum viable product, and this is a good way to test this out in terms of marketing. So you could invite people to your mailing list, but you need an incentive. So maybe a white paper of some interest to that sector or to your audience that you can give away. This information you probably have, it's just a case of putting it together. Or a webinar, or a video, or something useful for your audience, for them to give you their email address. And that's just one example. Once you've got the email address, you want to start taking them through the funnel, the sales funnel of saying, okay, we'll come to an event. It could be online, it could be a webinar, it could be a meetup, it could be some sort of networking event or a talk or a workshop. There's something where that organisation can connect with the audience. Crowdfunding is really good, partly just as a practice, as a way to get everything organised, because you'll need an elevator pitch, you'll need a video, you'll need an understanding who your customer is, you'll need to show your team and lots of proof of concept. Even if the crowdfunding campaign doesn't work or doesn't get launched, it's a really good way to practice that. And then obviously actual sales. There's so many, particularly tech companies I've worked with, which rely on investment, unfortunately, for years, and they don't quite get off the ground for various reasons. But they could have made some actual sales in the early days to really prove whether or not the company would work. So again, we'll go back one. Again, with the two slides, we've got problem and solution. If you take just another minute now, if you want to write down a couple of words each, or share some ideas, and then we'll move on to the last two slides. So off we go, 1 minute each. Okay, we'll move on to the last two sides now. So we've gone through motivations, obstacles, problem, solution. So you're getting a really good picture, hopefully, of the business side of most brands and how to tell that story. And you won't use every single side for every single story. It depends on the situation. We'll come to that at the end. So this one is probably the most interesting, especially for creatives. It's normally the one that the founders want to focus on as well. And it's the most engaging, and probably one that you would start with in your story in a lot of cases, because it's about grabbing attention. So this is the differentiators. What are your wow factors, and how do you clearly stand out? And that's what every brand really wants. They need to showcase themselves in the best light. This could be hugely impactful and should be a fun part of the story. The idea is to make people sit up and listen. So another way of thinking about it is to say, well, what will grab your audience's attention in the first 3 seconds or really short amount of time? So if you're at a networking event and you are talking about your organisation and what you're doing and how you're doing it, grab someone's attention in a few seconds so that they automatically want to know more. They might literally say, well, tell me, how do you do that? Why do you do that? What is that? I don't quite understand that. I'd like to know more about that. Make sure that it's different, obviously, that it's interesting as possible and memorable. So it might come with a bit of a story mixed in with your motivation of background as to why you have that differentiator, why you stand out in that certain way. For Airbnb, one of their differentiators is this, and obviously as big organisations there's many differentiators that they can pick and choose from, but in the early days it might just be a few. So this is one for Airbnb. Find a place to stay anywhere in the world. So pretty much anywhere in the world. They have the most hotel rooms of any company now, and they don't even own them. And experience life as a local. Now the second part is probably more powerful than the physical part of having the ability to stay pretty much anywhere in the world. Because they've changed the way the industry is, and they've changed the way their competitors act, and now their competitors are trying to catch up. So that's a key differentiator, and that's how they managed to grow, but also how they managed to secure the investment in the early days. Here are a list of lots of different differentiators that we think make up good brands. There's a mixture here of experience, the proof of concept, and actual sales. So things like case studies, happy clients, testimonials, obviously sales itself, or pilot schemes, or prototypes, those sort of things, because there's always different stages proving how good the brand is. The other side of it is excellence. So that's down to the skills and expertise of the team, and perhaps the partnerships involved as well. So sometimes there are no sales, especially in the early days. There might not even be any customers, but you may, as a team, have a lot of experience that you can draw upon, and a lot of understanding about the problem to solve. So that could be communicated, and that could be a key differentiator as to why that team is better than the next startup. So there's a long list. What we normally say to customers are, let's focus on 2 or 3, and let's make them really great. Once we've done that, we can move on. So for established businesses, we often look to their clients and their customers and say, right, can we turn those into really good case studies? Pick the clients you want to keep and the ones you want more of. So then let's draw out that information. It's surprising how many will have great clients and great stories, but they won't talk about it. Normally because they don't have time or resources to put that together. But a really great video or PDF or images and testimonials can be the sales tool. That's all they need for the next win, the next client. And if you publicise the right ones, you'll get more of that type of client. But as you can see, there's a whole list there, and it's a never-ending task to try and get them all. And the last one is connections. So now you know what the motivations are, problem solution, what might trip you up along the way. Key thing is the differentiators, how to stand out. But then you need to connect with the audience so that they know about it. So how do you reach and build a relationship? And build a relationship is key with the audience. How do you make sure the right people know about the brand? And for a lot of brands, a lot of businesses, even if they're big, it's about using resources most effectively, because most of the time the budget is slightly less than it needs to be. The resources are a bit tighter, and there's less people involved that can help you out. So you've got to think on your feet, and as creators in the room, that's part of the challenge as well. Sometimes it's a case of thinking, when is the best time to connect and influence and help the customer? So there's different stages of the business, and that depends on lots of different things. Here's one example for Airbnb. Obviously they're online, so that's where they connect. They give people access to accommodation through mobile devices primarily, but also on websites. But their big drive from 2007-8 onwards was through the mobile technology. And one of the ways they connect and using the right time is through high volume periods. So during holiday seasons, during Easter, summer, Christmas, and other festivals and timings around the world which are relevant to travellers. So they will put a lot of effort into those marketing channels at those times. Looking at marketing channels, here are just 8 key categories or key areas that we want to focus on. There's obviously a lot of subcategories below that, and you might be able to think of a few extra channels as well, especially as social media changes and the way we connect with brands and each other changes over time. But just a couple of examples for us. We want to use our resources wisely, and our resources are tight. We're a very small team. So we focus in StoryCube on phone calls and partnerships with organisations like Museum of Brands, like business networks, like accelerator programs, like universities, rather than advertising and potentially spending a lot of money on not connecting with the right people. So at the moment, in terms of our timeline, it's good conversations, maybe some FaceTime with those people to describe and share what we do, create strong partnerships that will attract the right audience and build on that. And we can do that sustainably and carefully. Also online, we have a website, we have a course, we have social networks that we use, we have private networks, business networks we use as well to draw people in. But the other elements of marketing channels will come later, when the resources are available. So often the case is that companies will dive in and try to do it all and not do very well. So it's good to focus as much as possible. And then lastly for this side, this is my favourite way of making a customer persona. So empathy map. Has anyone used an empathy map or created one? Yeah, there's a few people nodding. There's lots of different ways of doing personas. A lot of them are great, and as long as you get them up and get them visual and shared with the whole team and keep them in view, that's really good. But this one asks all the right questions. I won't go through them all, but the first question is basically, who is your audience? Simple. And you create an empathy map for each audience type as well. What do they need to do? So what are they doing now and what do they need to do? Maybe how are they solving that already? Maybe they're solving it without any companies, or maybe they're using one of the competitors. And then the two key questions in the middle. What are the pains that they're trying to solve? What are their fears and anxieties about this problem? What can you really solve for them? And then what are the gains? What are the benefits, the hopes and dreams that you can bring as a brand? Sometimes you appeal to both, and sometimes you'll work on one or the other. But having this is really good for sharing, particularly with the creative team, but any strategies you come up with to make sure you're on task and that actually it fits with the customers that you're trying to appeal to. Okay, so that all comes together in terms of the full story. And I'll just show you, obviously, the one example from Airbnb of how all these 6 sides can then be put into one simple paragraph. So I won't read it out, it's there for you to go through, but I will highlight the key areas. So as you can see, we're kind of drawing out the formula, and we've done this multiple times with different brands, either taking the exact copy from their website or from their brand guidelines, or based on what we've seen from their advertising and their marketing messages. So you've got the motivation, they belong anywhere. You've got connections, they've used technology. They're differentiator, one of many, life as a local, and they're able to connect with hosts. So it's solving the problem and creating that solution as well. And you can do that succinctly for many brands. And as I said at the start, you don't necessarily need to show all of it. You're not going to talk about obstacles if you're publicising, but an investor might want to know about that. So, what next? What do you do after this session? I want you to take away something practical and hopefully continue some of the momentum. I can see some people have written things down based on notes or in the actual story cube itself, and hopefully that's helped. Here's some of the actions that people often do after a session. So on the back of your story cube, you've got the list. If you've been writing them down, great. If not, doesn't matter. If you've got a couple of things that you want to do after this session, these might be in the list. More market research, practicing the pitch a bit more, so we had those exercises earlier, looking at competitors, making a prototype, building on sales strategy, partnering, refreshing the brand. We've had all of these come out of the sessions, but maybe there's something else. So the idea of that sheet is to make sure that over the next few days, weeks, maybe months, but it's a little bit too far ahead, try and build on what you've learned today. And then from the point of view of how to use the story cube, as I mentioned, you don't need every single part all the time. You probably need to keep it in your mind and have that conversation, particularly if it's a one-on-one with a customer. But there's different ways of thinking about it. So it might help with recruitment. And with recruitment, to get new team members, you might want to focus on the motivation. So that could be a really key part, especially if you don't necessarily have a load of cash to give them to incentivize them through a big salary or benefits and pensions and things like that. Most organisations want to sell. Even charities are looking for donations. So they want to highlight the problem to solve, to make sure that they show that they're aware of it, and the customer is therefore more aware of the problem that exists. Sometimes the problem is not highlighted and it's subconscious, so it needs to be put out there. Obviously the solution, and then the key differentiators. So these are the main ones that are important. And then lastly, if it's for investment, all of that is important, all of the cube, but the obstacles are maybe something to start with, to highlight the elephant in the room that may not normally get discussed. And often I've been at pictures where people talk about X, Y, and Z, but the investor or the judge is sitting there thinking, but it's just like X, Y, Z business, it's just like the other competitors, or your business model doesn't quite add up at the moment. So talk about those obstacles early on to alleviate that and get that discussion out there. So this is a reminder again, I showed you at the start. If you only take away one thing from today's session, is make sure your story is concise, unique, believable, and engaging. So it's Q. So I'm going to ask you, or I'm going to give you some time, about 25 minutes or so, to ask some questions. Hopefully that's brought up some ideas. So have a think about that for a moment. Before I do that, before we go into questions, one more slide to share with you. So we've got a 3-hour version of this workshop at the British Library. There's one this Thursday in the morning, if you're free. Go to that link. We'll also send out an email tomorrow, so you can click onto that. There's another one on the 1st of April, if Thursday is too soon. So you're very welcome to join for that. At that session, there'll be about 20 other entrepreneurs and creators in the room. A lot more time to go through this, a lot more time to discuss each part of the cube as well. There's 3 offerings. There's an online course, which I'll send details to you through Museum of Brands. I'll give you 50% off as well if you want to sign up by the end of March. One-to-one coaching. Quite often from the 3-hour sessions, people who want to go through the course or just want a helping hand, book coaching. That's an hour each, online or in person. And then consultancy. As I said, I run an agency, so if there's any branding, animation, website projects that you need help with, feel free to come to me, and if it's not right, if we're not a good fit, I can introduce you to someone else. Here's my details at the bottom, michael@thehouselondon.com. If you want to get in touch for any of that or anything else, feel free to drop me an email anytime. Thank you very much for listening, and time for questions.